Good evening, everybody. Well, good afternoon or good morning. It depends when you're listening to us. Today, the mighty podcast known as Is There Fudge on Mars is going to be looking at Is There Fudge on the Streets? I don't know about you, but I am rather confused about the kinds of things that are going on the streets of Britain at the moment. And I know I've got some very clever friends here, Steve Maltz and David Jones, who've been looking into it and have maybe some pointers for us to get to understand a little bit more about what's going on. I think, we've chatted about this before, and we're not here to kind of point fingers at people or be judgmental, but we would like to be able to understand. I mean, I don't know again about you, but I've been looking at all these groups that are involved on protests on the streets, and I haven't got a clue sometimes on who's doing what and why they're doing it. So, welcome, and welcome to Steve, welcome to David, and welcome to myself.
Welcome.
Hi, let's start straight away. Who wants to open the innings, so to speak?
Well, I'm going to open by asking David because he's so articulate, just to give a rundown, a very brief rundown of what happened over the last week, simply because I wasn't around. I was in Italy, and though I was catching bits of it, but I think you two are probably living it day by day and formulating opinions. And knowing David Jones, who was probably heavily researching what was going on. So perhaps in a sort of a short series of paragraphs, David can sort of explain from his perspective, firstly, what actually was happening.
Well, for the first time since we've started a podcast, I'm actually noteless, Steve. So I've been pretty busy myself the past week. But let's cast our minds back to the terrible events of that awful Monday when those three lovely little girls were slaughtered at a nursery in Southport. They'd gone to attend a Taylor Swift dance class together with a number of other children. All the other kids, I now understand, have been released from hospital. I'm sure they're suffering all kinds of psychological damage after what's happened. I'm not too sure about the two adults who did everything they could to protect him. So I think one of those was one of the instructors, and I think one of those was a teacher at the nursery. So I don't know whether they're still in the hospital. But then there was misinformation on social media that the attacker seemed to be an Islamist or a jihadist. And of course, then all hell broke loose. It seemed to be used by both the extreme right and the extreme left to weaponize whatever agendas they've got. And in the midst of that, on both sides, have been some really decent, ordinary people, concerned citizens who are just genuinely worried about the direction of the country. There appears, although it's been strenuously denied by the establishment and by the government, although people are pointing fingers, there appears to be some kind of two-tiered policing of certain events, and perhaps we can unpack that a little bit as we go on. There have been demonstrations and counter-demonstrations, and in the midst of all this, one of the things that has powerfully struck me over the last 24 hours has been the response by the Jewish community, many of whom have said they utterly condemn the thuggery and the violence on both sides. But at the same time, they have felt unable to participate in any kind of anti-racist reaction to anybody who's been on the, again, we're using this in inverted commas, on the far right, because so many of the people who are demonstrating against those who follow people like Tommy Robinson are flag-waving pro-Palestinian supporters, and that has directly led today, I understand, to a Labour councillor being arrested for suggesting that people should have their throat cuts if they support this Zionist conspiracy. So where we go from here, I simply don't know. But it's a minefield, David. It's an absolute minefield. And I think for us as Christians, we have to tread very carefully here and trying together in the 45, 50 minutes we got this evening to try and work out where we're at and where all this is coming from.
Can I give my take on it?
Just before you do that, Steve, just so for clarity, it sounds like there's 3, 4 different factions here that are kind of all reacting to what happened with the little kids, but actually also to what the other faction is doing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to. I'm going to try to explain that, because I agree. I think there were 3 or 4, probably 4 factions overall. Let's say 4 identifiable groups, because I was thinking identity is the big thing here, because everyone who seems to be associated with these so-called riots or whatever have been called the far right. You know, whoever they are, it's the far right. It's the same words that we used Saturday before last, which there was an event in London in Trafalgar Square, which we haven't mentioned yet on the podcast, but I was there as an observer. So it was arranged by this chap called Tommy Robinson and a lot of others who are, say, part of his grouping. And the idea was just to allow ordinary people, traditional British people, to come along in a peaceful rally, not a demonstration, not anything, not a march. I mean, there was a march, but there was no slogans, there was no singing, there was no banners. It was just Union Jacks and flags of all other countries. So they met at Trafalgar Square, and there was about 40,000 there, and I was there, and it was the most peaceful gathering you can imagine. There was no chanting. The only chanting you could hear in the background was those who are the anti lot, who I actually visited them as well. And because I'd been to the pro-Palestinian demos a few weeks earlier, it's the same people. It's the same stalls that were put up. It's the Socialist Workers' Party. It was Jeremy Corbyn's organisation, Stop the War, blah, 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 with all their flags. And their chanting was Nazi scum off our streets. So the implication was that these peaceful people who were families, black and white, even Muslims there, Sikhs, with turbans, they were singing patriotic songs. There was a Christian witness there. They were Nazi scum. And the next day in the papers, there was absolutely no pictures of this event in Trafalgar Square. When there was one mention of it, it gave a description of a meeting of the far right, beer swilling, patriotic, Nigel Farage, reformed sort of followers, etc. It was such a sort of, it switched me on. It turned me on. It made me realize, and I've never been a conspiracy person, but it made me think there's something going on here. I'm watching independent reviews of what went on by journalists on YouTube, just ordinary people interviewing, walking around interviewing people, and people and mentions on X or Twitter. But when I read the papers and watch the BBC, you get a totally different picture. So what was going on? And then that was the Saturday. Then the Monday we had the atrocity, and then was it from Wednesday we had the riots. And the implication was these are the same people, the far right, these evil people. And of course, a lot of them were thugs, but there were thugs on both sides. But in terms of the awakening, it was nothing to do with racism. There's not a racism element in any of this, let's say, counter-revolution or whatever was happening on the streets. It's one target, and that is the supposed Islamicist incursions into our country, creating their own laws, doing their own, the grooming gangs. It was like enough was enough. You got the London Bridge, atrocity. You got the Manchester thing and 7/7, and it's like enough is enough. We want to be heard.
Those things you just mentioned, Steve, that was what the people who started rioting, having fights with the police, etc. These people were reacting to those things you just talked about. Is that right? But what was the, if you like, the banner the people who you first saw, who were very peaceful, you said, and there seemed to be, I think you said to me that before, there were kind of families and young children, all sorts of people and different nationalities. What would you? Is there a one-liner for what they were there for?
They would all say, "We are patriotic Englishmen, Welshmen, patriotic British people." And we were there, and it was like a royal occasion. It's the same people that would turn up to a royal occasion.
Okay, and would you say there would be patriotic immigrants as well? People who had come to this country and now see themselves very much as British.
And that's the thing. There's so many Muslims who fit that category, as well as Sikhs and Hindus and Jews and whatever, that would say that we're British. We have adapted to the culture. We follow a football team. We go to royal occasions. We can proudly have a Union Jack and have street parties and stuff. There's more of those people than people realise, and a lot of them were there. If you see the pictures and the videos, they were there.
Okay, so then we have them classed as far right fascist, which you think is incorrect based on your own experience. But then you've got the group, the reactions to the 3 little children being murdered, and many other people injured, and there seems to be some talk about the fact that there has been an organised reaction to that it's not just been some spontaneous groupings, but that it's been stirred up from, I don't know, from some people have talked about from outside of this country by organisations outside of the country.
It is a mystery, because like what was supposed to happen last night, which was Wednesday, there was supposed to be like 100 riots, let's say, around the country, and so all the anti-fascist people were there on the streets, but it didn't happen. And it's almost like there's misinformation going around, and you just wonder, there are elements out there, subversive elements, and I don't want to talk about conspiracies, but no one has come forward. No organisation seems to have come forward to say, yeah, we're organising this and we are patriotic and this is what we stand for. Even Tommy Robinson is not. He's saying, he's asking for peace and says it's nothing to do with him. He's on holiday. He's on Cyprus. He wasn't part of it.
I sort of get the feeling. I mean, I'm watching really objectively at it, and I look at these people throwing things at the police, setting police vans on fire, breaking into shops and looting them, and I'm thinking, actually, a lot of these guys, I should look at them. I'd cross the other side of the street if I saw them walking towards me, because they're muscular and they look scary. So, what the initial response like that? What drove it? Is it purely that? I mean, as David said, that they thought that this guy had been a jihadist who'd come into this country illegally.
Yeah, but
purely
that seemed to have triggered it, but of course that was quickly quashed, wasn't it? So by the time we get 2 or 3 days along, they know the truth, but the riots were still happening.
Because
it's almost like momentum had started and they couldn't stop it.
His parents had come to, where was it, Cardiff?
Cardiff, yeah.
From
Rwanda,
that's it. Which had its problems of its own at one time with genocide.
But you wonder what his background is, or what his motivation was. No one has spoken up about that. Because if someone is, say, slightly mentally confused, they would leave their house with a knife and just kill someone in the streets. They wouldn't travel to a centre and target teenage girls.
Well, he only lived a few less, I think, than a mile, maybe a couple of miles or so away from where this happened. So if it was advertised locally, he would have known about it.
Yeah, but why would he target?
I have no idea. I mean, it's a mystery, isn't it? Until people can interview him and get inside his mind. I mean, I did read something. Again, it's difficult to always know whether something is true, that at one stage he'd said, we need a genocide in this country like in Rwanda.
Really?
Yeah. But is
you
that
don't know
true?
who to believe, do you?
You don't know. Well, you don't really.
I know.
But it still seems a reaction
Yeah.
on the streets.
But I tell you what happened last
It's almost
night.
like
Yeah.
it's almost like football hooliganism.
It
That
is.
It's rampant.
Yeah.
Just for
Yeah.
the sake of it.
I think these people, they're thugs on both sides, and it's the thugs that everyone saw. I didn't see pictures of what was going on. I wondered whether there were peaceful people there as well, or whether it was just all thugs. I don't know. I wasn't there.
Well,
Didn't
there's a
see
lot
the
of people
pictures.
there with their mobile phones filming it.
Yeah.
My guess is
I
that
tell
they're
you
not
what,
involved.
I saw the pictures from last night for the counter demonstrations, and I looked at the banners, and they were the same banners who were at the anti Trafalgar Square march, and those banners were produced by the Socialist Workers' Party, Stop the War Coalition, all Marxist, communist, socialist concerned. So these people, who were probably ordinary people in Walthamstow and Hackney or wherever, all the things that they were holding up were produced by far left organisations.
So we've got now this third faction coming in. We've got the first one we were talking about, these peaceful people on the streets. We've now got the thugs, in inverted commas, going out and protesting against what had happened with the children, and well, that's what they say. And then we've now got this third group, which is seems to be for the far left, people who are seeing this as an excuse to get into fights with the right.
I would put the groupings like this. There were the Trafalgar Square people who were peaceful patriots, but they just wanted their voices to be heard. Then there are probably the right-wing thugs who you saw throwing bottles and doing all the nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Then you've got the reactionaries, the pro-Palestinian people, who are the same people who you probably saw Wednesday. They're all the people that go on the pro-Palestinian marches. So they'll be from the left. But even among them, there will be the activists, the provocateurs. Is that the right word, David?
I don't know, but it's a great word.
Yeah, but you get them in all these occasions, don't they? They're the ones that you got them that, going back to biblical times, when Jesus was being crucified. They're the ones that are wandering around through the crowds, whispering to people, "Shout, crucify him, crucify him." It's the same thing. It's just those who manipulate the crowds.
But you were saying that this third group, I mean, you could go on a little bit further and talk about a fourth group if you want, but the third group had been relatively peaceful last night. Is that right?
I don't think there was any violence at all last night.
So
apart
even
from that bloke who wanted to behead people. I don't know.
So even though there was this left-wing reaction, and the people
there was only a reaction. I don't think the others even turned up.
Right.
I think it might have all been just false information.
Because they were talking about 30 events or 100 events or whatever.
I don't think there's no word about whether there wasn't. It was peaceful, so I presume there's no clashes, which means you presume that there was no far right writers there. Otherwise there would have been clashes.
It passed peacefully, Steve, because there was literally nobody from the far right who was there. So that they had nothing to vent their anger towards.
That's strange.
Yeah.
You get a sense there's so much manipulation going on. It's just hard to get your fingers on it.
But I can't remember who was telling me this, that they knew somebody. It can't have been you two, because we haven't spoken since you got back from Italy, Steve. But somebody's telling me they knew somebody who had a business in one of the areas where the protests and marches were taking place, and he'd had to take down all of his signage and posters and anything advertising what he did, because he was genuinely frightened that as they went past his premises, that they would break windows and break in and cause damage. I mean, this is quite scary for people, isn't it?
It is. It's creating a fear, isn't it? You wonder what advantage this could be for people to want to do that, because it's fearful. And it always seems to happen during August, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That one in 2011,
Yeah.
that was in August during the hot time, the riots in London.
Yeah, I think it's almost worth rewinding the clock, Steve, back to that event to see whether we can analyse whether there are any lessons we can learn from that. and will give us insight into what's currently taking place. So for those who don't know, that was the killing of a young black man called Mark Duggan.
Oh, yeah.
In Tottenham. And that had a similar explosive reaction in that other towns and cities across the country were suddenly up in arms. And again, I would say that the other cities and towns, the people in those cities and towns who rioted, that was in the main, although not all of them, obviously, because people had genuine concerns, that was in the main by people who were weaponizing the killing of Mark Duggan. Just as I think both sides in this, to their shame, have weaponized the murder of these children and have used it for their own political agendas. Not everybody.
Right.
There'll be innocent people in there who are decent, ordinary people on both sides. And I don't think we should be weaponizing the murder of children for anything. So, so I think that's one way of looking at it. Now, if we look at that event of 2011, what really happened? So, what most people will not say today is they'll say a black man was killed by the police, and that led to rioting across a bit like the murder of the killing of
George Floyd.
George Floyd in America. But what people fail to mention is who Duggan was. So Duggan was a drug runner. And on that particular night when he was killed by the police, what most people are unaware of is that he had a gun in his hand. And that's why the police shot him.
Yeah.
Now, Joe and I at the time we were more or less newly married. We were living in the city centre in Manchester. And we saw exactly what you were describing there, David, in terms of Luton. We saw, and I'm talking about hundreds of people coming back from the city centre, young people again, as we've seen out in Liverpool and other cities and towns this time, with televisions in their hands, with all kinds of things that they'd robbed from the city centre. We actually filmed the whole thing.
Wow.
From we did, from our apartment window, and we took the footage to the local police station the following day to see whether the police could use it as evidence. So you had the exact same thing. So you always get people jumping on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
Now, I just want to say one other thing, and then maybe we can develop this. 2 years previously, I think I might have mentioned this to you both, the now sadly passed Christopher Hitchens, who was an atheist. He was an atheist, unlike his brother Peter, who's a practicing Christian. Christopher Hitchens did an interview in 2009 in which he said that as soon as we allow words that have no meaning whatsoever to be embraced by the whole of society, by politicians, we are in trouble. We are on the back foot. And he was particularly talking at that time about what was a newly invented word, and that word was Islamophobia. Because what Christopher Hitchens was hinting at was, look, you should be able to critique any religion or any ideology for that matter, be it religious or political. And as soon as you say, no, we can't do that, we're in a whole heap of trouble. And I think one of the things that disturbs me on both sides here, with both the extreme left and the extreme right, is that we have British values that most of us would hold to, like the rule of law, like democracy, like respect and tolerance. And if those start to vanish from society, we end up with the kind of anarchy and chaos we've seen, not just over this week, Steve, but actually since the awful events of October 7th.
Yeah.
So we can go all the way back there. There's been demonstrations by pro-Palestinian supporters virtually every single weekend in Manchester. And I know it's been similar in London as well.
Yeah.
So you've got these two sides who seem to have their own agendas and who have weaponized this tragic event of these lovely little girls who've been murdered.
Yeah.
Just as we saw in 2011 with the killing of Mark Duggan.
Yeah.
So I think The final thing I'd want to say about it, for which may help people, is there's nothing wrong with patriotism. There is something wrong with nationalism. Nationalism can be extremely dangerous. But even with patriotism, if patriotism is the main thing in our lives that we hold up and say, I am going to embrace my patriotism as a member of Britain. And I think if we do that, there's a real danger for us as Christians that we retreat from what I think are even more important than British values, and that's kingdom values.
Yeah, well said. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. And the thing about nationalism is it's part of the problem anyway, because it is Muslim nationalism. There's a certain element of Muslim society that will put their own national status higher than anything that Britain offers, and that's why you have these enclaves and Sharia law in certain areas. And I'm thinking, in a sense, the chap there was a brave businessman who went in during that knife crime like Monday, and he helped disarm the terrorist, and he got stabbed. And when he came out of hospital, I don't know his name, but he made this statement. He's like our age, and he said, and he was saying, don't use this as a pretext for rioting, and don't start blaming everything on the far right. Look at the symptoms. Yeah. And he actually said, just look at the idea of what's happening with certain elements within the immigrant society, the immigration that was coming in. So he was actually saying, look at the symptoms.
Yeah.
And I was looking at even the Daily Mail, that you'd think would be a little bit right wing, but they're siding
a little bit.
Yeah. Well, they weren't. No, I mean, if you look at it now, there you go. The night anti-hate marchers face down the thugs, and the bloke, their commentator, who's very conservative, he was following on this idea of let's look at the cause. Let's look at the cause of the problem at the moment. Let's not focus on the reaction. Look at the cause. And he went through a list of causes, but not one of them was the actual real cause, which was what was happening with certain elements within Muslim society. It was all about poverty, lack of education, lack of employment of the right wing people. So because they're not employed, they go out and and do their thuggery. But it wasn't pinpoint, and at no point do any of these papers pinpoint the idea that it's not racism. It's just a reaction to all these news stories that we keep hearing about certain elements within Muslim society that are disrupting our safe, cozy British way of life. And it is such a tiny minority, but you'd think that one element that could work, why don't the Muslim community sort their own problems out? And I've got a story to tell you, because it just shows you the contrast. If you go back 100 years, when the Jewish immigration came into London and fleeing the pogroms from Russia and Eastern Europe, about 100,000 poor Jews came in, none of them speaking English or anything. They come into London, 100,000 of them. So again, immigrants, but they were all dealt with by their own community. The Jewish community welcomed them in and looked after them, fed them, and then helped them find employment. They built schools, they built hospitals within their own community. The government wasn't involved in any way. And the school, and my dad went to this school, it's called the Jews Free School. It was the biggest school in Europe at the time. Its one objective was to take these kids who were, poor, bedraggled, Yiddish speaking. And once they got into the school, the only language ever spoken was English. They're not taught their own culture at all. They've just taught British culture and everything that's needed to do to be able to integrate into society. Right. So when they left the school, they were able to go into society and get jobs. And people like Alan Sugar and that whole generation of Jewish immigrants, they benefited from that attitude. So if the Muslim community had done the same, then perhaps we wouldn't have so much of the problems that we have now.
Yeah.
I don't know. Or it could
Possible,
be,
isn't it?
that's just one aspect. I'm sure there's a bit more.
There's what concerns me a little bit, guys, and maybe it's another faction, another element, is that talking to people here where I live, I've discovered that there is bubbling underneath quite a lot of anger about, and this is just from normal people. They're not going to go out on the streets and throw things at people or break in anywhere. But there's a lot of anger about the impact that illegal immigration is having on our society. And it just seems to me, I mean, I'm talking for normally very reasonable people, angry about it. Why are we now struggling in the NHS to get an appointment? Is it because there's so many illegal immigrants who've come in and are now taking NHS appointments? What's happening with all the jobs? What are these people doing if they're doing illegal jobs and not paying tax? And it goes on and on and on. And it's something which, I mean, patently, the previous government just didn't get to grips with, despite promise after promise to do it. And you wonder where that's going to go, because this is not something that is going to cause violence, but it's actually something that may cause a massive political storm that's brewing.
I think that's really interesting, David. So under Boris Johnson's leadership, one of the main policies of the Conservative government was this levelling up programme to try and level up society right across the United Kingdom. I looked at some statistics earlier and was shocked to discover that in all those areas where we've got real problems, so I'm thinking here of places like Rotherham, Bradford, Hartlepool, and again, a lot of those places voted for Brexit. They thought there would be a dividend in voting for Brexit. When you look economically at those areas, going all the way back to the coalition government when they came to power in 2010, there has been no change at all, apart from it rising slightly, which again is shocking in itself, to the unemployment figures amongst young people in those areas.
Right.
So it was hovering sort of 13 years ago at around 17, 18%. It's now around 20, 22% in all of those areas that I've just mentioned. Now, if people feel they've got no investment in society, if generation after generation is not able to find employment, people can often look for a scapegoat. And for a lot of people, and again, we've got to be able to have these conversations in a mature way and with cool heads, and almost, particularly for those of us who care deeply about the country, genuinely care about the country, we've almost got to be able to have this conversation in a way that doesn't inflame it. So is it true, for example, David, going back to what you've just said, is it true that when migrants, wherever they're coming from, because I mean, we've got a major issue with migrants coming over. I think that the largest number of migrants in the past 12 months in the UK have actually come from Albania.
Yeah.
And again, we won't open up that kind of worms at the moment, but it's not just to do with groups of people who are coming from largely Islamic countries.
Yeah.
So there's a lot coming from Eastern Europe as well. So are we able to say with confidence, is this an incontrovertible fact, that when a lot of migrants are arriving, are they being given above and beyond benefits that people who are indigenous to the country are not receiving?
Yeah.
Because if that is the case, you can understand why that's going to wind people up.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And to go back to what Steve said, if it's also that people are coming over and they are not embracing British values, if they're not assimilating into the culture properly, then clearly that's going to create problems as well. And that is not, and I want to make this abundantly clear, that is clearly not all Muslims, because lots of Muslims are working, as we know, in education, they're working in the health service, they're working in all the major industries, they're entrepreneurs and all the rest of it. But there does seem to be a not insignificant number who do espouse things like Sharia law, who do seem to have a very different view of women than the way most Indigenous Brits would have that view of women. And we've got to be able to have this conversation and try and understand. I think Steve's right. The only way it can be dealt with is by those groups themselves. They've got to put their heads above the parapet and say, look, we need to embrace this. And there's no way that anybody should be prejudiced or discriminatory towards anybody because of their race, because of their religion, because of their skin color. But we still got to be able to criticize enemy ideologies without falling into that trap.
Yeah.
And yet, and this is again from conversation with people, you hear of something happening. It's a killing. It's in a family. It's an attack on the street. It's a rape, and people are now saying, "Betty's black, Betty's Asian, Betty's an immigrant," and that's unfair because it just doesn't necessarily equate. But that's where people are at the moment, and actually, unfortunately, often when you see the pictures, I mean, all this stuff that happened in Rochdale with the grooming of the young girls there were all Asian guys, weren't they? Yeah, and you see this kind of thing happening a lot, and it creates this stirring and this unrest, which says, "Hey, there's something going on there that we don't like," and it seems to be people who are not, in quote unquote, British.
But this leads into why Trafalgar Square happened.
Yeah,
It's a reaction to exactly what you just said.
yeah,
That's why they were there. They
yeah.
just wanted their voices to be heard. And there were Muslims there as well.
Is that all? Is they want their voices to be heard, but what do they want to happen? I mean, I don't understand. They're gathering. They're saying, yes, we want to preserve the British way of
I
life
think
or something.
what they want,
how?
what they expected, and this is the disappointment that possibly led to the riots, is the fact that here we are filling out Trafalgar Square. We're there. We're peaceful. We're British. We've got flags. Let people notice that we are there, and no one noticed, and that produced the frustration that I think led to the riots.
But if you were to say they had a message, what was the message to the government of the day? What was the message to the media? What did they want to communicate?
I think they wanted their country back. That if there's one phrase that kept coming up, we want our country back. You cannot, and you've already said that already, you cannot keep witnessing those pro-Palestinian marches week in, week out on streets and disrupting your life. And Just Stop Oil disrupting your life. All these fringe groups who would tend to be a lot of them the same people. And then you realize, because there are obviously people behind it all, and ordinary people are saying, we want ordinary life back. We want to be able to walk the streets. We don't want to see Palestinian flags everywhere. We don't want to keep hearing these atrocities happening and the police not doing anything about it because of multiculturalism. That goes back to the Rochdale grooming thing, and they just wanted to I suppose meet like-minded people, because the people were just chatting, and people were talking from all different parts of the country to each other, and it was just a nice gathering. But then it's what happened afterwards.
Yeah,
all the horrible stuff came afterwards.
Let's ask another question and tack away from that a little bit. What's the church's reaction been to all of this?
Yeah, quite. The church, what we have to state as a principle is that the church is part of the establishment now. It gets its credibility through being the spokespeople for Christianity. It's a political entity, the Church of England, and those who speak up, the bishops, etc. They are not going to speak prophetically. They are not going to bring up anything that goes against the government's party line. I've never seen the Archbishop say anything other than what everyone else is saying, and he hasn't said anything other than basically the far right are naughty people and should be put down.
Put on the naughty step.
but there are plenty within the church who are, and you see them on YouTube, and I suppose we are part of that, who are saying, no, there are things that we're not being told, and we need to talk about it. And but we have, and this is, I've just written an article for PFI, and the essence of the article is
PFI is
Prayer for Israel. This
okay.
is something to do with Israel. It's the fact that there are many things that we could do. We could go on marches. We could write letters to the MPs. We can write, we can do all sorts of things, but everyone else is doing that, and no one's going to listen. But what we have in our arsenal is the power of prayer, and prayer has changed history. Prayer has stopped disasters, has deposed dictators. Despite what people might think, prayer got us through the Second World War. There's plenty of examples of that. And two little old ladies in the Hebrides in their 80s, sisters, they prayed for months and months for a revival, and then it came just through their prayers. That's what the church can do and should be doing, is getting together and praying, not just for peace, but also praying for the enemies, praying for a change of heart. So I think that's the only way anything's going to happen, is for those who are perpetrating it to have a change of heart, and for peace to come in and salvation. This is what we should, and that it all sounds very radical, but this is what Christians are meant to do. We're not meant to be activists.
Yeah. Well, fundamentally, we're in this world, but not of this world.
Yeah,
I think that's one way of looking at it. I know we have a group of people who are prayer intercessors who pray about particularly this ministry and wider things that you're involved with, Steve.
yeah.
Have you had any reaction from them in terms of what
they are really motivated?
What it motivated in what sort of way?
Okay, I won't give their names, but so they're what you call proper intercessors. So they don't just sit around and have sort of one line prayers. They pick a subject and they go deeply into it until they feel that God has connected with them, and then they let go. So they don't let go until they think they've got a solution. And what is coming to them regarding what's going on now is the need for prayer.
Right.
For
what
prayer.
You just said.
Yeah, basically what I've just said, they agree with me. I've just sent my article to them and they're all agreeing totally. It's what they've been saying, it's what God has been saying to them. Christians should be peacemakers in the sense of praying into the issues, but also praying into the bad stuff that's happening. Not wishy-washy stuff, but warfare prayers to because we know there are spiritual forces out there that are disrupting our society. We could go into spiritual warfare, and we know that that's true. Though a lot of people listening, will think we're just lunatics. But we know the truth.
They're partly right, aren't they? But
They're partly right. We're lunatics in a sense. we're fools for Christ, as they say. But foundationally, that at times of crisis, and I do believe that we are in a time of crisis. We haven't even looked at Israel and what's going on over there, but I was also saying in the article, Israel is the front line, but they're fighting on behalf of all of us against the same foe. Well, ultimately is the enemy, the devil. We could mention his name, but it's warfare, but Christians fight on their knees. We're not out there fighting with swords. We're not crusaders anymore.
Well, thank goodness for that. David, your thoughts on this?
I think this all comes down to identity. Where do we get our identity from?
Yeah.
We could list any single subject, any single ideology, and it would all come back to identity. Why is it that lots and lots of young people and it's been almost like a social contagion, have decided that it's okay to take puberty blockers.
Yeah.
Why is it that medics have gone along with this and removed teenage girls' breasts? Because people are not getting their identity in the right places.
Yeah.
Why is it that people often, but not all of them, I want to make that clear, that people think it's okay to block the whole of the M25 and still see that as the greater good when people couldn't attend funerals?
Yeah.
When people have been waiting for 3 years for cancer treatment, couldn't make it, when emergency service vehicles couldn't get through to help people. Why is it that people think it's okay to hate somebody because of their skin color or their religion? Because they're finding their identity in some kind of perverse nationalism.
Mm.
So this is all the same thing. Why is it that people are out on the street railing against the only democracy in the Middle East and not talking about the absolutely abysmal and horrific crimes, particularly those that are taking place against women in Iran?
Yeah.
I don't see anybody demonstrating in our streets every week against Iran and
Yeah.
against the regime in Tehran and what they're doing and all their proxies and the mayhem they're causing, until even this is the irony of it, isn't it? Even now, countries like Saudi Arabia are speaking up more for, Israel than people in this country are. So I mean that's where we've got to, and it's all to do with identity. If you find your identity, your main identity, through a philosophy or through an ideology, be that, as I say, political or religious, or maybe through some kind of sexual identity, you are going to go way off track.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that with people both on the left, on the right, and even those within the church. People have lost their moral compass. They don't know our Judeo-Christian values, which have held this country in place for, over 100 years, are being destroyed brick by brick. And I think it's doing our country a great deal of harm. And there's still, hopefully, voices like ours, and maybe there's a chorus of voices that maybe are not heard above the cacophony of others.
Yeah.
But they're still out there. But we are being diminished. It was interesting. I was visited a church in the Lake District quite recently. And there was a woman in there who was, I think she was the verger. She was 80 years of age. And she was saying, her congregation is all people over 70. So, these are the stalwarts. These are the people who have kept this country going through prayer, as Steve said, for generations. And once we lose those, I wonder what will happen to this country. Because the only thing that can transform, as we've probably said before, is the power of the gospel, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
And you look in vain for your identity anywhere else.
Yeah. So it seems to me that you guys are saying, look, we need to be looking to God about this. We need to be praying about it. And we need to be not looking for our identity in groups or philosophies or beliefs about things, but actually finding our identity in Him and then praying about what's going on. And if we do that, we can, in our own little place, can have an impact upon society.
Yeah.
What struck me also was, with your reactions, both of you, is that it's like a massive jigsaw puzzle. And that, you're picking out little things. I mean, Steve, you're talking about Israel, front line of it. David, you're talking about identity, politics, and gender issues. And it looks to me like there's an awful lot going on in society at the moment. And we're seeing little bits of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of what's really going on. And I don't know about you, but I find it disturbing. And what I want to do is to react in the right kind of way. And at the very beginning, we talked about, I think, David, you mentioned kingdom values, as opposed to just British values. And I think you're right that the Judeo-Christian values are very much the bedrock of what our society has been, but it is moving away from that.
Mm.
I wonder actually if there's more conversation that we need to have about this on a future podcast.
I think there is, because this is the result of something that's been going on for 100 years now, and this is too big a subject, and we haven't really covered it. We alluded to it in one of our earlier podcasts about cultural Marxism and about Alice Bailey and
Yes.
prophecies. It's, we're coming to the end now, and it's just too much to add to it. But I think David Jones, what you said was absolutely brilliant. The way that you actually summarised our situation, and you too, David Shepherd, because it is simple. Our identity is in Jesus. If a Christian loses sight of that, then they've lost sight of the only thing that's really important for them. It's one thing saying you're a Christian, but unless you are endeavouring to be more like Jesus in everything that you do and everything that you say, then you're not fulfilling what he's put you on this earth for. Just going to read a scripture, 2 Corinthians 3:18. And we all who with unveiled faces contemplate the Lord's glory are being transformed into his image, that's Jesus' image, with ever increasing glory, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit. And that's our aim. And we need, and when you ask the question, what is the church doing? The church is not doing that. No one is seeing Jesus. No one is talking about him. No one is suggesting that going back to Christian values is a way out of all this mess that we got into. There's absolutely no foundation to our society at the moment. It's run on relativism. There's no rules to society. We can go through the 10 Commandments and probably find that they're all being broken, or they're all, down to how you want to interpret it. We've lost our foundations, our framework, and that is a subject that we should go into at some point. Yep.
That sounds like something we definitely need to look at.
Yeah.
There's another passage that, even as you were talking, I was just thinking about, and let's just see if I can find it. Yeah, it's in Galatians 5, where it talks about the fruit of the Spirit. In other words, the life that is inside us of God. His Spirit inside us produces love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And it just strikes me that almost as a template of how we should be reacting to people, that's kind of sums it up, really, showing, kindness, goodness, faithfulness towards people, gentleness, and self-control. Should we knock it on the head there?
Yeah.
It's kind of came to an abrupt stop, didn't it?
Well, it's not just about us; it's about the poor listener. We've gone over the hour, I think. Well, maybe, I don't know how long we've been.
Well, yeah. Gosh, there's so much that we've covered there, and grateful to you if you managed to stay with us and listen to it. Please, we want to hear from you. We're very interested what reactions you've got to the issues that we've been talking about. It's very nice of you sometimes just to say, oh yeah, I really enjoyed the podcast, but would you really come back and give us some feedback? We'd appreciate that. And you can do that at saltshakers.com, where you've probably found this podcast. And in the meantime, we'll say goodbye, and we will get back to you at the next time, when we're not quite sure what we're going to be talking about, but it could be connected to this. So goodbye from myself, David Shepherd, and goodbye from Stephen Moss.
From me. Bye.
And goodbye from
And
me.
from David Jones. Bye for now.
Bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.